In the first two lectures I gave, a very incomplete but brief summary of World War One, and you'll get a lot of that, more of that in a Western civilization class. But this is a world civilization class, and World War One was in fact called World War. And so, if it seems like many people in America right now are still kind of not aware of what's going on, even between European powers and the U.S. in World War One, the rest of the world, their involvement in it is extremely elusive. So let's look into that. Japan occupies Germany's Pacific Empire. And something that's often forgot about is that while the Japanese were a part of the Axis in World War II, and we know Pearl Harbor, then we can think about the tragedies, the raping of Nanking in China, to the dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan was actually in alliance with the British in 1902, and they enter on their own terms, and they move against Germany with also intent on taking parts of China. So remember, Japan is still playing that imperial role, but they believe that they're following along the lines or taking the lead of their European allies. What's interesting about this, there's a video, I can't find it right now, but it shows that in World War One, the Japanese, well, in World War II, the Japanese treatment of prisoners of war was infamous. But in World War One, it wasn't so bad, to the point that many German soldiers that were captured by the Japanese actually were treated so well that some of them stayed in Germany, and they still have descendants there, and in Japan. It's very odd. But what happens is that Japan later on is going to feel betrayed by the West, and they're going to try to reassert themselves in a much more aggressive way. And so that's something I think we're going to be talking about more when we get into World War II. So for now, just keep that in mind. So the war in Asia, here you can just take a look at, again, remembering that Asia many are colonies that are going to be utilized in some way or another by European powers that are also fighting each other. Okay. India's participation. So 850,000 Indian soldiers fought beside the British in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Think about that. 50,000 died in action, and they contributed 150,000 horses and mules, 11,000 camels, 75,000 tons of timber, and 550 million rounds of ammunition. So India as a part of the British Empire, what you're going to see later with Indian nationalism is also this resentment of actually putting themselves on the line, being involved, sometimes dying on behalf of an empire that only sees them as second-class citizens, and that's going to end up blowing up in the empire's face of the British. This kind of use of their colonies without giving them the proper, especially without even really giving them the full credits due. I mean, not to say that they didn't get, some, medals or things like that, but at the end of the day, this gentleman here, supporting the British in the war effort, having a Western haircut, style of dress, never would be accepted as an equal. Now, what did this do to Africa? This is also something that's really needs to be talked about. Britain and France attacked Germany in Africa, and this devastates much of Africa. They drafted more than 100,000 Africans to serve as soldiers or porters. 10% of the drafted died. So can you imagine being forced into a war of your occupier, if you will? dying on behalf of an empire that officially sees you as less again, um, and then blowing up buildings and shooting on their soil. Imagine, and this happens to many nations. Imagine if Mexico and Canada went to war against each other, but they had to get to each other by, you know, through us, of course, because we block off Mexico and Canada, and bombs being tossed either way between Mexico and Canada. It would be horrific. And imagine if we were drafted into fighting on the side of Canada against Mexico, or vice versa. It's just ridiculous. So, but these are the things that were happening. And then there was a global influenza where 3% of East, West, and Central Africa died also. Okay, that was spread by the war. Um, Now the U.S. enters. Woodrow Wilson was president. He was reelected with the slogan to keep us out of the war. There was what's called the infamous Zimmerman note, where it was an intercepted message by a German diplomat trying to bribe Mexico against the U.S. This was seen as intolerable, and one could debate that would be a good reason to go into war or not. I'll let you decide, but this offer was to return Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona to Mexico if Germany wins. And you'd have to really also explore the Mexican-American War, which wasn't that long ago. I mean, at the time, you have to realize is that we did aggressively, under Polk, the way we attained Mexican territory was an act of aggression. You can't really argue that if you look at the Mexican-American War, and you should, by the way. But that is also not really the point, except to say that it was a relatively recent, I think it was 1848, that we solidified, the United States, the Mexican territory that we won. And so I guess the time that wouldn't have seemed as outrageous of a negotiation or possibility as, let's say, now. I don't think even a nation would think that was even possible now. Okay, so you got to put that in the context of the times. Congress declares a war, but only really deploys large numbers of troops until 1918. So this is the way the U.S. gets involved. Okay. The global Spanish influenza is one of the deadliest aspects of the war. Here we have 1918 killing between 70 and 100 million people. So if we think about that as a consequence of the war, we really are talking about an unexpected, horrific consequence of war. And I will stop there, and we'll go back to talking about the Middle East a little bit.